Clara Evans woke up early that morning, her small apartment filled with soft light from the window. She took a deep breath and looked around her studio. Rolls of fabric were stacked against the wall and sketches covered the little wooden table. It was not a fancy place, but to her it was full of dreams. She had been working hard for years to build her small fashion design business, sewing late into the night and sending designs to clients who were just beginning to notice her name. On that quiet morning, she felt peaceful until she heard a firm knock on the door. Surprised, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. When she opened the door, a man dressed in a gray suit stood there holding a cream-colored envelope with a golden crest on the front. He said politely, "Delivery for Mrs. Clara Evans Kellerman." Clara felt her heart skip. That crest belonged to her husband's family, the Kellermans. She thanked the man, closed the door gently, then stood there staring at the envelope. It looked elegant, expensive, and somehow heavy with meaning. Slowly, she broke the seal and read the message inside. It was an invitation to the Kellerman Foundation's annual charity gala, signed by Eleanor Kellerman, Ethan's mother. Clara read the letter again, trying to understand. She had never been invited by Eleanor before. In fact, at the wedding 2 years ago, Eleanor had told her quietly, though politely, that she hoped her son would grow out of his little romantic phase. Clara had smiled then, holding her tears back until she got home. Now she was being invited to a night of luxury hosted by a family who once told her she did not belong. Clara sat down on a nearby stool, her hands shaking a little. She loved her husband Ethan deeply, had married her not for her background, but for who she was. He was gentle, loyal, and believed in her dreams. But his family lived in a world made of silk and silver, a world that looked at her simple tastes as foreign. Their mansion stood on a hill overlooking the entire city, tall glass windows and gardens that looked like something from a royal movie. When she told Ethan about the invitation later that evening, he smiled, a little surprised. He said, "Well, that's new. I guess my mother is trying to make peace." Clara looked at him carefully. Or maybe she just wants to show everyone that she still runs the family's image. Ethan laughed softly and pulled her close. "Whatever her reason, you are my wife, and you belong wherever I do." That sentence warmed her heart. But still, when she thought of walking into that ballroom, her stomach turned. She had attended one Kellerman event before, a small dinner after their wedding. The guests had spoken in low tones about travel, art, and business, words she recognized but had little to add to. When she mentioned her own fashion studio, some smiled politely but quickly changed the subject. Now this gala was going to be much bigger. All the family's business partners would be there with reporters, investors, and society figures. Everyone would be dressed in gowns worth fortunes. Clara looked at her reflection in the mirror that night. Her hair was tied up in a simple bun, her face calm but thoughtful. She whispered to herself, "I can do this. I have faced harder things." The days leading up to the gala passed quickly. Clara worked during the day, finishing an important order for a client, and in the evenings, she prepared her gown. She decided to design her own. She chose a dark blue fabric that shimmered slightly under light, but was simple and clean. She spent hours sewing, cutting, checking the fit, and adjusting the details. Each stitch gave her strength, as if she were sewing courage into the seams. On the morning of the gala, Ethan brought her breakfast and told her how proud he was. He wore a black tuxedo, and his calm confidence made her smile. When she finally stepped into her gown, she felt ready. Her heart still beat fast, but not from fear anymore. It was excitement mixed with quiet determination. As they arrived at the grand hotel where the event was held, a line of luxury cars sparkled along the driveway. Flashing lights from cameras danced across the red carpet. Ethan held her hand as they stepped out. Inside, the ballroom glowed with golden light, and soft music played while waiters carried silver trays of champagne. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. Clara noticed several heads turned toward them, some faces she recognized from photographs on the walls of the Kellerman mansion, others from television screens. Then she saw Eleanor Kellerman across the room, tall and perfectly dressed. Her eyes met Clara's for a moment, the old distance still there, polite but cold. Clara straightened her shoulders. She smiled calmly and whispered to herself, "I belong right here." It was the beginning of a night that would test her grace, her strength, and the quiet fire that had always been inside her. The ballroom was brighter than Clara had imagined. 1,000 lights shone from the grand chandeliers, and every corner glimmered as if covered in gold.
Ow.
Music filled the air, and people in fine clothes moved gracefully, holding glasses of champagne and speaking in light laughter. Clara held Ethan's arm and tried to keep her steps steady. Her heart was racing, not from fear, but from the rush of being in a world that had once told her she did not fit in. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. He whispered, "You look stunning. Don't worry about them." She smiled at him, though her voice was quiet as she said, "I'm fine. Let's go in." When they entered the hall, a hush passed through a small group nearby. Some heads turned, some smiles froze, and some whispers began. Clara knew what they were thinking. She was the wife who came from an ordinary family, not from a famous one. She was the woman who worked with fabric and thread, not with money and business names.
Ow.
But she also knew she had worked hard to be where she stood, and she was proud of what she had built. Ethan guided her toward a table near the main stage. The smell of roasted food, flowers, and perfume mixed in the air. Musicians played soft violin tunes while waiters carried shining dishes to tables. Clara looked around as she sat down. Every detail was perfect, from the crystal glasses to the gold-rimmed plates. The guests laughed easily as they told stories about art shows, vacation homes, and trust funds. Clara smiled politely at a woman sitting beside her, who glanced at her jewelry for a moment before looking away. After a while, Eleanor Kellerman made her entrance. She wore a long silver gown and diamonds that caught every bit of light. She looked graceful, confident, and untouchable. When she walked over, people stepped aside. She smiled at Ethan first, kissed his cheek, and then turned to Clara. "Clara, I'm glad you could join us tonight," she said, her voice polite but still distant. "Thank you for having me," Clara replied with an easy smile. Eleanor nodded and moved on to greet another guest. Clara exhaled quietly. She felt as if she were walking a careful line, balancing between grace and emotion. She knew this was not the place to show nerves. Moments later, Ethan left her side to greet an old business partner, promising to return soon. Clara was fine being alone. She picked up a glass of sparkling water and watched people mingle. Across the room, she saw a group of women chatting near the tall windows. Their laughter carried a light teasing sound. Clara recognized one of them as Ethan's cousin. She heard her say softly, "Her dress is pretty, probably rented though." Clara's hand tightened around the glass for a second before she relaxed it again. She looked down at her gown. She knew that not one stitch on it was rented. She had designed and sewn it herself, every line clean and perfect. The thought made her breathe easier. Instead of feeling small, she began to feel quiet pride stir inside her chest. She decided to walk around. The room was filled with art displays and charity exhibits that the foundation supported. She stopped by one showing handmade furniture from a youth program. A young designer was explaining the idea behind it, and Clara listened with genuine interest. When he noticed her attention, he thanked her kindly. It was refreshing to talk with someone who spoke from passion instead of status. Soon, Ethan returned and placed his hand gently on her back. "You disappeared? Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked. She nodded. "I was just looking at the displays. They're amazing." Before they could continue, the host stepped onto the stage to give a speech. Guests turned their attention to him as he spoke about the Foundation's charity projects and future plans. Cameras flashed, and photographers took pictures of the most important guests. When introductions began for sponsors and donors, Clara noticed how the Kellerman's names sparkled on the screen behind the stage. Beside it, she saw other names from the same world of wealth and influence. It was a reminder of what kind of circle she had entered through marriage. The dinner continued, filled with perfect service and practiced politeness. Clara laughed at Ethan's jokes, spoke kindly to strangers, and smiled through moments of silence that carried a hint of judgment. Yet, as the night went on, she felt something change inside her. Watching the people around her, she realized that many of them were not as confident as they seemed. Their smiles were sometimes too sharp, their jokes too careful. They were keeping their own masks in place. It made her realize that she was not the only one pretending to belong. Later, when the main event ended and guests began to dance, Ethan pulled her close and whispered, "You did great tonight. I survived," she said with a small smile. He chuckled. "No, you shone. Look around. They all saw you." Clara followed his gaze. Some guests were watching her, not with scorn, but with curiosity. A few nodded politely. Even Eleanor looked toward her once with a quiet expression that Clara could not read. Clear understanding passed through her then. Tonight was not the end of something difficult, but the beginning of something larger. This world might not have accepted her yet, but she was no longer afraid. She lifted her chin slightly, smiling with calm strength as she looked across the glittering room. In her heart, she knew this night would be remembered not for how they judged her, but for how she learned to carry herself among them, with grace that needed no approval. Weeks passed after the gala, and Clara went back to her normal days in her small design studio. The memories of that grand night still came to her sometimes, mostly in quiet moments while she worked. Remembered the soft music, the cold faces, and the whispering voices that judged her without knowing her story. But she also remembered how she had kept her back straight and her smile gentle. That memory gave her courage every morning when she started her work again. Her studio was not big, but it was full of creativity. Fabrics hung from racks, sewing machines sat near the window, and colors filled every table. Her assistant Lily was a cheerful young woman who admired Clara deeply. One morning, Lily noticed how Clara had been working for hours without pause. "You really should rest a little, Clara," she said kindly. Clara smiled. "I will, after I finish this design. This one might be special." That day, she was making something different from her usual style. She had been thinking about creating clothes that were elegant but comfortable, perfect for women who worked long days yet wanted to feel beautiful. She called the idea quiet luxury. It was inspired by her own experience at that gala, where expensive dresses had looked perfect, but had no feeling of warmth or purpose. She wanted to create something that looked and felt human. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's new collection began to grow. Word of her designs reached one of her previous clients, who showed the sketches to a young businessman running a new fashion technology company. His name was Derek Holden, and he became interested in working with her. He called her studio himself and asked for a meeting. When Derek stepped in, he looked around with real appreciation. "You made this place from nothing," Clara nodded, wiping her hands on a piece of cloth. "Yes, every inch of it." He smiled. "I like that. The company's working on a sustainable clothing line. We want designs that blend comfort with beauty. I think your ideas fit perfectly." Clara listened quietly. She had been waiting for an opportunity, and now it was right in front of her. They talked for hours about materials, designs, and visions. When Derek left, Clara felt a rush of excitement she had not felt in a long time. She realized that she could turn her creativity into something bigger. That evening, she told Ethan everything over dinner. He listened with a proud smile. "That sounds incredible. You see, this is what I always knew about you. You don't need to fit into anyone else's world. You build your own." His words settled in her heart like sunlight. They gave her the strength to accept Derek's offer. Within a few weeks, her small studio became a space of new beginnings. She started designing for the fashion technology company, combining her handmade touch with new digital tools. The work was challenging, but she learned quickly. As months went by, her designs drew attention from more clients. Magazines began to feature short stories about her inspiration. They wrote about how she came from humble roots and now created fashion that spoke to ordinary people and elites alike. Her name slowly became familiar in business circles. At first, she felt shy about the growing attention, but she reminded herself to stay true to what mattered. Each time she felt nervous, she remembered the gala. She remembered how the eyes around her had been cold and how she had stood her ground. That memory kept her centered and strong. One afternoon, while working late, Ethan arrived with takeout boxes. He looked proud and amazed as he saw her surrounded by fabric samples and computer screens showing designs in progress. "You've turned this place into something special," he said, as they ate together. Clara laughed softly. "I'm just doing what I love." He reached for her hand. "And that's exactly why it works." People can feel that in your work. In the months that followed, Clara's team grew. She hired more young designers who shared her values. They worked hard but laughed often. Her new brand was now partnering with big stores, but Clara still visited local markets to find materials. She believed that creativity should stay grounded. Eleanor Kellerman heard about Clara's growing success through business friends. One afternoon, she called Ethan to congratulate him, though her tone was careful. When he passed the phone to Clara, Eleanor said, "You must be proud. I see your name everywhere these days." Clara kept her voice calm and kind. "Thank you, Mrs. Kellerman. I am working hard." When the call ended, Ethan smiled knowingly. "That sounded almost like respect," he teased. Clara shook her head. "Respect is not something to be given. It is something earned." Her company continued to grow. She started traveling to meet partners, learning how technology could help create clothes that were both stylish and mindful of the environment. Reporters began calling her the designer who balanced grace and strength. She never forgot where she came from or the people who believed in her when no one else did. Through her journey, Clara discovered something deeper than success. She found that belonging was not about being accepted by others. It was about accepting herself. She had once been told that she was not good enough for the Kellermans, but now she no longer measured her worth by their opinions. As each day passed, she looked at her work not as proof of victory, but as a reminder of resilience. She had turned every doubt into a reason to keep building. Her story was still unfolding. And Clara Evans was only at the beginning of a legacy that no whisper or judgment could ever silence again. A full year had passed since the night of the gala. The memory of it had turned soft in Clara's mind, like an old photograph tucked away in a drawer. So much had changed since then. Her small studio had grown into a full company. Shelves lined with sketchbooks and fabric now shared space with desks and computers. The air no longer smelled only of thread and dye, but of ambition. Clara's designs were now seen on glossy magazine covers, and famous people wore her brand proudly. What had started as a dream within 4 small walls was now a name known to the world. Ethan had stood beside her through it all, helping her balance her business and her peace. Their love had deepened in the quiet hours after long days. Sometimes they laughed at how the same people who once questioned their marriage now wanted her designs. Clara had learned not to be bitter, but grateful. Every harsh word from the past had turned into fuel that kept her going. One morning, as she reviewed her schedule, her assistant walked in with an envelope marked with gold letters. Clara's heartbeat slowed when she saw the crest on it. It was the same Kellerman family symbol that had once made her hands tremble. She opened it gently. Inside, an invitation read, "The Kellerman Foundation Gala, sponsored by Evans Couture Innovations." She smiled quietly. Her company was now one of the main sponsors of the very event where she had once stood feeling small. This time, the invitation was addressed to her alone. It did not read Mrs. Clara Evans Kellerman. It simply read Clara Evans, founder and CEO. She looked at it again and felt a calm pride spread through her chest. It was not about revenge. It was about arriving at the same place with her own strength. When she told Ethan, he laughed in surprise. "So they want the designer they once overlooked to be their sponsor. That is poetic." Clara smiled. Life has good timing. The day of the new gala arrived under a soft silver sky. The hotel was even grander than she remembered, filled with banners and displays. Everywhere she looked, she saw her company name printed in graceful letters. Evans Couture Innovations had partnered with the event's environmental cause, offering a collection made from renewable materials. Her team had worked for months to prepare it, and tonight it would be unveiled. As their car arrived, reporters gathered outside. Flashing cameras lit up the entrance. When Clara stepped out wearing one of her own creations, the flashes grew brighter. She carried herself with quiet confidence. Her gown was simple but powerful, a design that flowed like water. Ethan helped her from the car, smiling proudly as the photographers called her name. Inside, the ballroom glittered again, but this time, everything felt different. People greeted her warmly, recognizing her not as a guest, but as one of the event's central figures. Strangers approached her to compliment her work. She thanked each one genuinely. For the first time, she felt that she belonged not because of her husband's name, but for her own achievements. When Eleanor Kellerman noticed her across the room, she froze for half a second before regaining her graceful composure. She walked toward Clara, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Clara," she said, voice even but softer than before, "it is good to see you again, I must say. Your designs have become quite the talk of the city." "Thank you, Mrs. Kellerman," Clara replied with a calm smile. "It has been a busy year." Eleanor nodded. "Yes, indeed. I hear this event could not have been completed without your company's support. We are very grateful." Clara looked directly at her. "I am happy to be part of it. It feels special to give something back." Eleanor held her gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod before moving on to other guests. Her expression remained measured, but a trace of respect flickered there. The host soon took the stage to begin the evening. As the lights dimmed and the crowd quieted, Clara was invited up to say a few words about her sponsorship. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking softly across the floor. For a moment, she looked out at the faces before her, many of which had once looked down on her. She felt no bitterness now, only gratitude, she said clearly. I started my journey with a needle and fabric in a small apartment. Every dream begins somewhere simple. Tonight, my company stands with this foundation to remind everyone that grace, creativity, and kindness can build stronger communities. The crowd applauded. For a heartbeat, she saw Eleanor watching her with eyes that were no longer cold, but thoughtful. When Clara returned to her seat, Ethan squeezed her hand proudly. As the evening went on, the event turned lively. Guests admired the fashion exhibit that her team had organized. Models walked in elegant gowns that reflected Clara's message of simplicity and care for the environment. People praised her designs for merging beauty and meaning. Reporters requested interviews, and potential partners approached her with ideas for new collaborations. Clara moved through the night gracefully, smiling, answering questions, speaking with warmth. Every step she took was light yet strong. She felt as though her younger self, the girl who once feared walking into this same ballroom, was walking beside her, smiling too. When the music softened near the end of the night, Ethan and Clara danced together. The lights glowed gently above them, and voices blended like calm waves. Ethan looked into her eyes and said, "You made your own place here?" Clara rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I never needed to fit in. I only needed to stand tall." Across the room, Eleanor watched them for a moment, her lips curving into a quiet smile. In that instant, every barrier between them seemed to melt into the golden air. Clara no longer felt like an outsider in that glittering world. She had not only entered it, but changed what it meant. The night of the gala ended with soft music fading beneath the golden lights. When Clara and Ethan stepped out of the ballroom together, the cool air of the evening touched her face. She looked up at the sky and smiled. The world around her had changed so much, yet she felt light and peaceful inside. The driveway was lined with cars and late-night laughter, but her heart was calm. She was not the same woman who had once walked into that ballroom uncertain and nervous. She was someone who had built her place with patience and faith. The next morning, Clara arrived at her office early. Her studio had become a lively space full of ideas and energy. People from different backgrounds worked together, drawing designs, talking about materials, and sharing discoveries. She greeted each of them warmly. They admired her not because she was their boss, but because of how she treated them. Clara believed that kindness built stronger businesses than fear ever could. By late noon, a tall woman arrived at her door. When Clara looked up, she was surprised to see Eleanor Kellerman standing there. She wore a muted gray coat and carried a simple purse. The rich elegance that once surrounded her seemed replaced with quiet honesty. Clara stood up quickly. "Mrs. Kellerman," she said, her voice polite. "Please come in." Eleanor gave a small smile. "I hope I am not interrupting. I just wanted to visit your office. I have heard so much about your work, but seeing it in person is something else." Clara motioned for her to sit, unsure of what Eleanor truly wanted to say. The two women sat across from each other, the hum of soft music and quiet conversation filling the background. After a moment, Eleanor folded her hands in her lap and looked at Clara. "I owe you an apology," she said. "When you married my son, I thought you were not right for our family. I judged you without understanding who you really were. Last night, while I watched you speak and saw how people respected you, I realized how wrong I have been." Clara listened in silence. Her heart felt a small ache, not from anger, but from the weight of the years that had passed between them. "Thank you for saying that," Clara replied gently. "I never wanted to fight anyone. I just wanted to be true to who I am." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And that is exactly what makes you remarkable. You did not change to please anyone, yet you rose higher than we ever did by trying to control everything." There was a pause, but it was not heavy. It was full of quiet understanding. For the first time, Clara saw in Eleanor's eyes something she had never seen before. It was not pride or politeness. It was respect. They spoke for a while longer, sharing stories about Ethan's childhood, about work, and about how life had a way of teaching lessons through kindness more than power. Before she left, Eleanor touched Clara's hand and said, "You have become the heart of this family, whether any of us realized it before or not." When the door closed behind her, Clara sat still for a moment, letting the feeling settle in her heart. She smiled softly, not out of victory, but out of peace. That evening, when she returned home, Ethan waited with flowers. He had already heard from his mother. He wrapped his arms around Clara and said, "You did what no one thought you could. You didn't just succeed. You changed their hearts." Clara looked up at him and answered, "All I ever wanted was to build a life that felt honest." Everything else just followed. The weeks that came after were filled with new opportunities. Her brand expanded into new cities. Her story was shared in magazines, and universities invited her to speak about her journey. Yet she remained humble. She continued to visit small markets and young designers, encouraging them to dream boldly no matter where they came from. She often told them, "You belong wherever your hard work can reach." Ethan sometimes joked that she inspired half the nation, but she always laughed and said she was simply passing forward the kindness she once needed. One warm afternoon, the Kellerman Foundation announced a new program to support small business creators. They asked Clara to lead it. The same family that once doubted her now trusted her to guide their legacy into the future. During the launch ceremony, she looked around at the smiling faces and thought about how far she had come. When she stood to speak, her voice was steady and full of warmth. "I once dreamed of belonging somewhere grand, but life showed me that belonging is not found in marble halls or golden lights. It is something we build through courage, honesty, and love. No one can take it from you once you find it within yourself." As the audience applauded, Ethan watched her from the front row with quiet pride. Even Eleanor dabbed her eyes discreetly with a handkerchief. Clara walked off the stage feeling lighter than air. That night, she and Ethan sat on their balcony watching the city lights. The glow below looked peaceful, almost like stars scattered across the ground. Clara leaned on his shoulder and whispered, "Do you know what feels the best about all of this?" Ethan smiled.
Tell me.
She looked into the distance and said, "I didn't win them over by becoming what they wanted. I did it by staying who I am." Ethan kissed her forehead. "And that is exactly why they will never forget you." The wind moved gently through the night. Clara closed her eyes and breathed in the sweet air of freedom. Her story had begun with pain and doubt, yet it had ended in grace. She had turned every barrier into a bridge, every judgment into strength, and every moment of feeling small into the proof that she was always meant to stand tall.